This is a Lloyds Boombox from the 1980s model V321, and today's video will talk about some brief servicing issues and a general review of this unit and some of the benefits and detriments that it has. This unit was made in Taiwan. The vintage looks to be mid to late 1980s. I did not see an exact date, but it's definitely mid to late 1980s. The unit weighs roughly 20 pounds. I didn't throw it on a scale, but it has a decent amount of weight. I think a lot of the weight actually comes in the 8-track mechanism. Other than that, you know, there's really nothing that's heavy inside of here. Because like I say, the cassette decks are actually plastic, so the only thing that had some weight was the 8-track mechanism. The unit is roughly 8.5 inches high. 19.5 inches wide, less than 6 inches deep. So I'm going to go through the different sections of the unit and we'll talk about them as we go. First of all, I'll talk about the general amplifying section of this unit. The speakers are rated at 3 watts according to the back of each of the drivers. So while I did not find any specs on this unit, the absolute most each channel could be rated at is 3 watts. So while it does play loud, it does distort fairly quickly as you start getting into louder volume levels. The next thing to note is that these speakers are full range. They are not woofers and there are no tweeters, so you have a single full range for each channel. And this here is an empty area, which is what they call a bass reflex, so it's basically a bass port, and that can be noted up here on the top left. The printing here says bass reflex type enclosure. And another thing, these side things look like they could be tweeters also. The one on the left is a dummy. There is nothing behind it. The one on the right contains the microphone for voice recordings or just ambient recordings in your area. The next thing I would notice is that there are no line level inputs for this unit. There are microphone inputs here. There's no inputs at all on the back or sides. So the only external inputs are these 2 microphone left and right inputs here on the front. And like I said, there is a built-in microphone that's up here right behind this area to the right. These are all sliding controls. There are no knobs for volume or anything. This has a sliding bass treble tone system, so you have to, as you go away from bass, you get more treble. This is definitely a cheaper system, and I mean, it works okay, but you're never going to be able to tailor the sound exactly the way you may want it on something like this. There's a 1/4 inch headphone jack to the left there. These speakers are fixed. They do not remove like some of the boom boxes did. They are integrated, which I actually prefer. I'm not a fan of the three-way systems where you can move the speakers and reposition them. I just don't want to deal with the wiring on the back of those. And as I said, these controls are all sliders, well, except for the switches here. So you have a tone sliding control, a balance sliding control, and a volume sliding control. These controls were not noisy at all, so I did not even put any cleaner in them. They were perfectly fine, so I left them. That basically covers the amplifier section. The next thing we'll talk about is the radio. The radio worked fine. I did not have to do any servicing to the radio at all. You have FM stereo, FM mono, and AM. I will demonstrate that now. So, reception is kind of bad where I'm at, so there is some interference here, but it's working fine. When you flick it to FM mono, the controls are stiff on these, and these are all plastic controls too. And then when you flick it to AM, and of course you get Brother Stare on an AM radio here. To turn it off, you can flick it to either 8-track or cassette. So we'll flick it to cassette there. And there's only AM and FM bands. There are no shortwave bands on this unit. The radio also has a 30-inch telescopic antenna, and there are no external antenna jacks to connect an external antenna to it. So moving on to the 8-track, what is unique about this boombox is that it has a built-in 8-track player, which is what drove me to acquiring the unit. The 8-track works well, but it's no frills like pretty much everything else on this unit. You slide the 8-track in, and you can simply choose the program one after another. There's no ability to fast forward anything, and no recording ability. So I will show you that right now. We'll put it on. You have to flick it to 8-track, and I have this. We won't be able to play much of this, but we'll pop in. I just use this for demonstration purposes. This isn't my preference in music. You can leave the 8-track in there and flick it off, as I just did there. So that shows you the 8-track. The 8-track did not need serviced. It was aligned nicely, and the belts, there's a single flat belt. It looked approximately 5 millimeters in width. I did not measure it, but it was a flat belt, and it was fine. It was not slipping at all. It was excellent rubber. So now we'll move on to the cassette deck. The cassette decks were a lot of work. I will show you some general pictures of the entire unit insides at the end of this video, and you can play them for your curiosity. The belts had all turned to tar, so it took quite a few hours to get them cleaned up. Each deck uses 2 belts. The one thing to notice is that there's no dubbing capability. Most of these dual cassette boom boxes, you could dub from one deck to the other. There's no dubbing capability on this unit. You can record from the radio, and probably even you can record from the 8-track. I haven't tested that, but even if you did, you're going to be recording through this external microphone, so it's not going to be ideal. So you would consider this to be no dubbing capability as far as I'm concerned. The best you could do is record off of the radio. And the second thing is that neither of these decks are auto reverse, which to me is a plus. I'm not really a fan of auto reverse decks these days. It was nice back in the 80s, and it's nice in a car. When you're driving down the road, you don't have to play around with flipping the cassette over. But in terms of a boombox, I don't personally find much use in a auto reverse deck. But in any event, it doesn't have that. Now, the next thing that I will totally focus on is that these decks are plastic.
Plastic.
Which is actually a theme with this boombox. The build quality compared to modern stuff is actually very good. The build quality compared to other models from the 80s is average to below average. I mean, that's not a knock against this because it's held up fine. It's in great shape and you can get plenty of use out of this. But if you compare this to a Panasonic, a JVC, an Iowa, a Hitachi, a Sharp, I mean, this just is not going to stack up. The entire deck mechanism is plastic.
Plastic.
I mean, it's almost nothing. Is there a piece of metal anywhere in this? So, I mean, you're dealing with a fragile mechanism, and it's actually very fragile to service. You have to be careful, and you have to have a delicate hand to service this. Each mech uses 2 belts. The belts that were on there were roughly, I would say, 1.2 millimeters square. I used modern round belts, which I find work a lot better for like a V-grooved system like this, and the belts work fine. The azimuth to align each of the heads cannot be done from the front, which is interesting because they have tiny holes here, but these do not align with the head in any way to be useful. So, and these doors do not pop off. Like most cassette decks, you can just slide them off to service. Not on this. You have to take the front cover completely off to get into the mechanism to align the heads to do the azimuth adjustment. The speed adjustment is simply on the back of the motor. You slide a flathead screwdriver in there and carefully tweak it. What you need is a calibration cassette from somebody that you feel is reliable, and you can use a frequency counter, but if you don't have a full-fledged one, even one of these cheap component testers that have the oscilloscope function built into it, if you go to the oscilloscope feature on these and you pull up all of the readings that it can take, you will notice that it has one for frequency here. And so something like this is super useful, and it's cheap to do basic servicing on a lot of things. This is plenty good enough to see if the frequency is accurate. And all you have to do is, while you have this out, you simply connect this across to one of the speakers while you're playing the cassette. You might have to adjust the volume level to make sure that you get a good accurate reading here, and you simply tweak it to get it as close as you can. There's not much in the way of other adjustments on these decks right here. You're not going to be able to do anything with the wow and flutter. It's inherently, it is what it is. If you use a good quality round belt or something similar, and you did a very good job of cleaning all the wheels and the motors and that in there. There's nothing more you're going to be able to do with this. It is what it is. So the thing you can do is put quality belts on it, make sure it's cleaned 100%, you know, no residue from the old belts left over, and then you're going to do the azimuth adjustment when you're done and tweak the speed. That's it. That's the extent of the servicing that you can do on the cassette decks. Rewind and fast forward are slow on these. They're not going to break any speed records. I'll pop in a tape here, and obviously I can't play much of this for copyright issues, but it's not going to break any speed records. But I guess the redeeming value of that is that it's not going to stretch your tape. So, I mean, a slower rewind or fast forward isn't the worst thing in the world. We'll play a little bit of this. Both decks actually sound very good now that the azimuth is aligned. Really, for a plastic deck, I'm surprised. It sounds extremely good. The pause mechanism works fine. It's a full automatic stop at the end, and there is a continuous play that will play deck A to B at the end. So that is a feature. Pop the tape in the other deck. A little bit of rewinding here. So what else can I say about it? Okay, these decks do not have cue and review. In other words, while you're playing, you can't also hit the fast forward to listen at high speed to see where the tracks stop and end. And the same in reverse, so you cannot do that. You have to press stop and then hit fast forward or rewind. Another thing, these buttons are very nice plastic chrome, but there again the key word here being plastic.
Plastic.
There's virtually no metal anywhere on this unit. I mean, that's obviously an exaggeration, but few and far between. So that's what I can say about this unit. As far as servicing, I needed to do absolutely nothing on the A-track. Even the azimuth was spot on that. The azimuth needed tweaked a good bit on the decks. This playback deck needed a lot of adjustment. It was way out. The record deck was out a little bit, enough that it certainly made a big difference, but it wasn't overwhelming. I also demagnetized the heads. I recommend the demagnetizing cassettes. Something like this. These are made by several different companies. I have a number of them. You just pop a little button cell battery in these. You put it in there, turn the volume all the way to 0, press play for a few seconds, turn it off, and it does an excellent job of demagnetizing heads. There's no voodoo involved like there is with the wands, which can sometimes be somewhat of a hit or miss proposition. So I recommend investing in these. You're probably going to, since most of these are all old units, the batteries are going to be shot in them, so you're going to have to replace it, and there may even be some slight corrosion that you'll have to clean up. But these are worthwhile, in my opinion. These are the way to go to demagnetize heads on cassette decks. They work consistently, and there's no voodoo where you're putting the wand in and slightly moving it around and then slowly moving it away. Not that those don't work, but I just find that these are so much better in general that I use these. So that's a review of this Lloyds Boombox from the 1980s, model V as in Victor 321. At the end of this video, I will show some photos of what the inside looks like. During the repair, the only things I found that were even slightly out of tolerance were 3 capacitors. There's a lot of electrolytics in this, but in all honesty, they were outstanding. You could not have really bought lower ESR electrolytics than what were in here. Of all of these that I replaced, which was only 3 here, only one of these was actually pretty far out, and that was this black one here. This was a 4.7, which was testing around 10 or 11 on the ESR, which was extremely high. But other than this, these 2 here were just slightly high, but they're actually low value electrolytics, so they're going to be high anyway. This one is a 0.47 microfarad, so in other words a half of a microfarad, and this one was 0.22. So the ESR is always high on these lower value electrolytics anyway. I mean, anything like 6, 7 is totally normal here. I think these two were both like 8 and 9, so they were slightly higher than I would have preferred. Maybe one of them was 10. I don't even think it quite reached 10. It might have been around 9.9 or something. So I did pull these two too, but these would have been perfectly fine to leave. More of a preventive maintenance on that. This was the only one that was likely to start causing problems. I don't have any service documentation on this, so in order to do a service job on it, you're mainly going to look at the ICs, pull up a data sheet and find out what are these ICs used for. Are they in the radio circuit? Are they in the amplifier circuit? That type of thing. So that's how you service something like this, and then you trace it out. If the IC is part of the FM stereo detection and you're having an 8-track amplifier problem, obviously you're not going to look at that part of the circuit. A signal tracer or a scope, both, would be very easy to troubleshoot something like this. So really there was only one component that needed replaced, and these two were borderline. Not even borderline, but just in the early stages of getting a little bit higher ESR, so I went ahead and changed them while I was in there, and they were easily accessible anyway, so that's why I did them. I'll show you what I used in terms of replacement capacitors. I used monolithic ceramics for these, not to be confused with the old-fashioned ceramic discs, which can be microphonic, although a lot of that is overblown. I mean, there are situations where that can come back to haunt you, but in most cases, even that's overblown. But these monolithic ceramics tend to work very well, and it's pretty much put them in and they're going to last, a lifetime or longer. They're almost indestructible. Okay, here's a kit of these monolithic ceramic capacitors. I like this kit because it has all the common values that you're going to need to replace those lower value, lower voltage electrolytic capacitors. This kit had 60 pieces of each of these values of 0.1 microfarad and goes up to 0.15, 0.22, 0.33, 0.47 microfarad, 0.047, that's on the low end. 1 microfarad, 2.2, 4.7, and 10. Each of these is at 50 volts, and I did an insulation breakdown test on them, and they easily handle the 50 volt rating that they have. These are extremely small, and of course they're non-polar. Therefore, you do not have to worry about which way you insert them into the circuit. They're extremely tiny, and I just like these kits because you'll never have to replace this capacitor again, and you get a lot of capacitors in values that you're going to use for your money. So I like using these, but I have nothing against the standard, electrolytic capacitor. It's fine too. This just saves me from having to order multiple SKUs whenever I'm placing a parts order. These have worked great for me. I've been using these for a number of years. So that's a review of this vintage 1980s Lloyds V as in Victor 321 boombox.